He's the only president to serve both terms at war. And why wasn't he able to pull out the Middle East? How did he end up at war during his entire tenure? For that, we go to CCTV's Jessica Stone in the newsroom. It's been an eventful 8 years. How does it break it down for us?
Well, Nathan, the Obama administration would really say that they aren't at war in Afghanistan, that they've just left a training and equipping remnant there to help the Afghan security forces get back on their feet. Clearly, though, the Taliban have been more difficult to defeat there than the White House planned for, because now President Obama will leave office with 8,400 U.S. troops still in place rather than 5,500 he originally proposed. And that's roughly where the U.S. troop levels were a year after the September 11th attacks. Now, you think about in Iraq, there are now just a few thousand special forces on the ground helping direct strikes and conducting training operations. So a small presence there, that of course part of the counter-ISIL campaign. But under this U.S. president, drones have really largely replaced soldiers. Obama launching at least 500 drone strikes, killing thousands of alleged terrorists.
Obama, of course, Jessica, continues to build on his efforts regarding climate change, trans-Pacific trade, Iran's nuclear program, nuclear proliferation generally. As he comes to the end of his term, it's legacy time after all. Yes. Is he in jeopardy of losing ground since he took office?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to note that the White House really considers the China-U.S. relationship to be, quote, one of the most significant drivers of global action on climate in particular. In fact, there's a strong possibility we could see both countries ratify the Paris Climate Agreement during this upcoming G20 summit in Hangzhou. They also credit China with working closely to close the Iran nuclear deal. And of course, China, the second largest economy in the Asia-Pacific, on the trade side, hasn't been party to the major effort of the Obama administration, the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade talks. The TPP appears to be dead, as we've been talking about for weeks now here in the U.S. Congress won't vote on it, and both presidential candidates don't support it. It is clear that the White House plans to make one more really big pitch targeted at the domestic audience and the regional audience for TPP when Obama travels to Laos after the G20. Take a listen.
TPP is in many ways seen as a litmus test for whether or not the U.S. has staying power in this region. We are a Pacific power, and we have been traditionally, but we're also on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. And what the countries of the Asia-Pacific region want to know, particularly the Asian countries, is whether or not we can be counted on.
So that's the message we can expect to hear from Obama next week after the G20 completes. That said, only 5 of the 12 members of TPP are actually in Asia, to his point. China, of course, negotiating a separate trade agreement with a broader number of Asian and Pacific nations, such as Australia, New Zealand, and India. And that agreement, of course, Nathan, is moving forward.
Jessica, what's been his biggest challenge, do you think, over the last 8 years? How's he likely to be remembered? Is there an Obama doctrine?
Plenty of challenges, certainly, and when you ask the president, he says his biggest mistake in these interviews that he's been giving as he gets closer to the end of his tenure is probably what happened in Libya, that he regrets the outcome there because it has become a sanctuary for ISIL and other terror groups. But remember how he began his foreign policy in many ways with a look towards Asia, this Asia pivot back in 2009, the president growing up in Hawaii and Indonesia. He really believes that the Asia-Pacific is most economically and politically, it's a really economically and politically important part of the world. He tried to turn the U.S. attention towards it, but the foreign policy established and the real needs of the Middle East, whether it's the Syria refugee crisis, the Arab Spring, or ISIL, they all kept drawing him back in. So some are going to probably say that his Asia pivot wasn't successful.
Events always get in the way of policy, don't they? Thanks so much, Jessica Stone, from our newsroom. To continue the discussion, we are joined by Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean at California State University. Here in the studio in Washington, P.J. Crowley, former Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama and Professor at George Washington University, and author of the forthcoming book, Red Line, American Foreign Policy in a Time of Fractured Politics and Failing States. Also with us is Jim Jatras, a former U.S. diplomat himself and foreign policy advisor to the Senate Republican leadership. Viewers can also join the discussion here by tweeting your thoughts and comments to CCTV_America. That's hashtag CCTV The Heat. Let's go to our panel. PJ, let's start with you. It is legacy time for Obama. And remember, he came into office 8 years ago, vowing to end 2 wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, closing Gitmo. But of course, all those events, the Arab Spring, Libya, Syria, ISIL, Russia, we could go on. If we're weighing up how he's done, would you give him a passing grade?
Of course.
Why?
I mean, Obama confronted arguably the most complex international environment since the end of World War II. And he largely delivered the foreign policy that he advertised in 2008. Now, did he have successes and failures? Yes. I would say one bookend is the Iran nuclear deal. And that was consistent with his objective of engaging America's adversaries and also, trying to wind down the existing wars without starting new ones. Obviously, the greatest complexity in his 8 years in office came, with the Arab Spring, the Arab uprisings that turned America's foreign policy on its head, and that's something that not only has he struggled with over the past 5 years, it's going to bedevil, next presidents for multiple terms.
Let's turn to Hamoud. Talking of the Arab Spring, it did seem to the outside observer that really the Obama administration were trying to react to events, despite what he laid down in his speech in Cairo in 2009. What sort of grade would you give him in reacting to those events in the Middle East as well? We talk about Libya and Syria as well. I know there's a lot.
There is a lot, and I think it's really a mixed bag. Definitely, it will be around. I'm not that an easy grader, so I might give him a C+ and B-.
Oh dear.
Because with the very fact that it is a very, very difficult situation, I think President Barack Obama has been able to work a thin line between the geostrategic demand in the region, the changes in the region, and the American domestic politics. As we see, there is a fatigue among the American public that we really don't want any world war. 6,000 people killed, about 40,000 injured, and trillions of millions and billions of dollars spent on the war. So there is that sense that in taking decision, in observing his actions, he's been taking a very slow path, reactive, as you said, but in most of the time, given the situation, I think it's a mixed bag. It's really not an excellent performance.
Just a quick follow-up on that. What's his biggest failure in the Middle East, do you think, and what's his biggest success, if there is any?
I think the biggest success is his foreign policy towards Iran. I think that will bring some new changes in the future. I think his biggest failure is Syria, and not being able along those sides is also the policy towards Iraq, where things continues to be the same thing. And along with that is the fight against terrorism. But Syria is biggest. I think it will be seen as a biggest failure. There are so many areas in the Middle East that one could consider as failures. The flip-flop, if you want, on the Egyptian case, what's happening in Yemen, in Bahrain. All these are very, very serious actions. But the Syrian politics has dominated, I think, the scenes. And given the importance of Syria, that could be one of the most sort of glaring failures.
Jim, you're obviously on the Republican side. You've advised top Republicans on foreign policy. How would you judge the Obama administration's foreign policy?
I'd be tempted to give him an F-, except for the Iran deal. I'll take the minus off and just give him a plain F. Look, this is a guy who was elected to be the anti-Bush. Instead, he turned out to be Bush light. That instead of renditioning and torturing people, we just kill them with drones. He's got his own Iraq-style regime change operation in Libya. He's tried the same thing in Syria and made a hash of that country, supporting essentially terrorists for 5 years now. A regime change of a rather different sort in Ukraine. On the big picture, the most deadly thing to American security is to push Russia and China into a de facto alliance against us by not having adequate regard for the foreign policy and security priorities of those powers. I'd be tempted to say I don't see how it could get worse, except my fear that if his former Secretary of State gets elected, we will see how it gets worse when all of George Bush's neocon friends join that administration.
Well, the election and Hillary Clinton potential president's foreign policy is another show. But judging with Obama, do you think he actually had a doctrine, or do you think he was reacting to events?
No, I think his goal has always been domestically. He wanted to transform America in a progressive direction, which he has largely succeeded in doing. I think he is, frankly, when it comes to foreign policy, he's an empty suit. He doesn't have much interest in knowledge in the matter. Remember, as a guy with no experience in this area, when he got even less than Donald Trump, when he got elected. And I think he basically reads what's on his teleprompter, and when he gets himself up at the edge of the abyss, as he did in Syria in 2013, he looks into the abyss and says, oh my God, how did I get here? How do I get out of it? I think that's maybe his only saving grace in that regard.
PJ, successes?
I think...
Apart from the Iran deal, which...
Well, I would say the opening to Burma, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, is very significant.
Everyone calls it Myanmar now, by the way. Everyone is still calling it Myanmar.
And by the same token, I think it is fair to say that continuing the maturation of the U.S.-China relationship and the climate change deal is a major part of that. I was in Copenhagen in December 2011 when the President and the Secretary of State barged into a secret meeting. And from that point where China said, we're a developing country, this is not our problem, you guys created it, you guys fix it, China has evolved, and that came about through some very aggressive diplomacy by the Obama administration.
I just want to go back to Hamoud for 1 second. In terms of Syria, where do you think the president, the US president, could have done better, considering everyone knows that Syria is probably the most intractable conflict that we've had? Or do you think it became like that because of inaction by countries like the United States?
Well, I think the biggest challenge there is the fact that the conflict was sort of let go for a long time, longer than expected. Some would argue that he should have intervened back in 2013. He should not have renegated on his threat. But the idea is that you have United States allies in the region, particularly Saudi Arabia. You have Turkey, a major ally. A solution should have been sort of come early to keep the integrity of the Syrian territory. For one of his reasons is the dysfunctioning of the whole Syria could be as bad as what we've seen in Iraq in the early 2003, 2005, or up to 2006. So the point is that staying too late, not taking action earlier, and being reactive in a sense, it was too little too late to intervene, where now we have the Russian involved, you have the Saudis fully involved in the issue, and then you have, of course, the latest development, or what has been always there, is the Turkish, the Turks, and so on and so forth. So the taking time, which is really one of the characteristics of this president, he takes his time to make these decisions. Sometimes it's in good way, and sometimes it produces different results. But either way, the failure to act earlier, sooner than later, perhaps complicated this situation.
I want to pick up with Syria, but we have to go to break. We've also got to talk about Russia. We've got to talk about the Asia pivot. Lots more. President Obama, of course, has advocated a world without nuclear weapons too, a more united international community, growth in developing countries. Has he achieved that vision? Tweet your comments and questions at CCTV-America, #CCTV The Heat. Stay with us. We'll be right back.